energy, will the Conservative group in the Assembly put forward or support a moratorium until some of the measures that you're talking about can actually be put in place? Or that we know a lot more about this before we go down the road of fracking?
Well, you've certainly got my individual view on it. The timing's been unhelpful on this because we haven't met as a group since the organisation said that they were going to be having the big meeting tomorrow. But we are meeting as a group tomorrow, and we will have a decision tomorrow. Unfortunately, I can't prejudge what they're going to say, but I think that if I can put a hint, there are many that think like me. Thank you.
First of all, does the Prime Minister live in an area where they're fracking?
The Prime Minister's view is that...
Does he live in an area where they're fracking?
I don't know what applications have been made in his particular constituency, but he's been plain. He says, as far as he's concerned, this isn't just a policy that will apply in industrial areas of, well, he's talking about Britain, obviously. And he's made the point that he lives in what I find now a very rural area, and as far as he's concerned, his constituency is as much up for grabs in terms of applications as any other part of the UK. But I can't tell you whether any applications have been made. No, and I don't know if there's any.
But the other thing was, he said it'd be 10 years supply. Now are we going to risk the health of all the youngsters and the people coming up for 10 years supply of energy? I've been watching a lot of what's been going on in America, and they're having tremendous health problems. Their water tables are getting contaminated. Their cattle have got problems because obviously it's feeding the gas. Right, I believe Swansea are building a barrage, a local little barrage, to create hydroelectricity. Why can't we, not the one, the only one thing is, if I, personally, I'd much rather have a wind generator in my back garden than a gas one. Because you can take the wind generator away, and you've got your country back.
Okay, Gary. There's a few questions in there. Can I answer them before we take those? The first one actually, and this one is my, first of all, I don't know about Whitney. The second one, when I mentioned earlier that we'd have enough energy for, I think it was 10 years, actually, it was if we, and I think it's my fault this, if we just took, I think it was 1 or might even be 10% of the gas that's already known about, that would supply stable energy, and that's one of the issues with wind, isn't it? Stable energy for 51 years. So that's why things like this just can't be simply ignored. They've got to be taken into account. You're asking me a difficult question about, do we want to talk about 200 years from now? I don't know, because we don't know how much shale gas is left to be discovered.
No, but what we do now will affect 200 years from now.
It might well do. The Prime Minister at the moment, on the evidence he's got, takes a different view. Welsh Conservatives take a different view and say, well, actually, we need to hear a bit more evidence on this. Sorry, what was the third question?
Oh, the hydro dam.
Oh yes, well the tidal lagoon. This is early days yet. I mean, I'm a big supporter of this idea of a tidal lagoon. I mean, there are some environmental impact questions that still need to be looked at. We haven't had a full impact assessment done yet. But in principle, that's the sort of thing I would like us to be looking at a bit more closely, where actually there's also a sense of community ownership of it as well, rather than the industrial scale wind developments like Atlantic Array, for example. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Hi, Nick Thomas, local resident. Carrying on from that point, it seems to be a focus about companies coming in from outside to exploit these resources, and there doesn't seem to be any provision or support for, say, Puffpool itself to set up its own local power station and exploit the resources itself. And I think we'd be able to push things further if you actually involve the local people, even in power generation, and go back to the way it was maybe during the 40s and 50s before the national grid came into effect.
Yeah, well, I think the current position is where there's coal-bed methane come out. It is a locally based company that's doing it.
Yeah, I know, but we're also looking at things like down in Somerset is that local community that built their own community screws so they could generate power and put that back into the grid. And that was a local community limited company that sold shares to the local people. And we don't seem to be seeing any support or even any notice of it being taken.
Well, there are a number of small scale producers, both of wind and hydro in particular, but they're dotted around Wales, and it's very difficult to see some whole picture of
there
them.
doesn't seem to be anything from the National Assembly itself looking at that and trying to push that. It all seems to be trying to pull in companies, larger companies from outside, and so on like that. There doesn't seem to be any support for local people to actually exploit their own resources.
But it's not for me to stick.
Cooperative rather than
Exactly.
government.
Well, exactly.
It's not for me to stick up with the government particularly, but I think that for the life of me, I can't remember the name of
The government's putting out grants and everything
Yeah.
for companies. Why can't it push the same thing for local communities?
Well, I think you've answered the question. The big wind companies are already there. They know how to get the subsidies. Why make a difficult job even more difficult as far as the Welsh government's concerned, I would say. But they do actually, there is money put aside to support small generators, but by your very question suggests that it's not actually very well broadcast.
Margaret, we have discussed this. Who do they go to for advice and money?
Oh,
Well, it's so good.
There used to be a website that actually you could calculate if you wanted to do it as a local community how much was needed for that.
Is it the Arbed scheme?
Sorry?
Arbed scheme.
I was in that one.
Yeah.
And I think
Well,
that's one about the fuel
Yeah,
poverty.
but it's really, I kind of think, don't you, Richard, you know, that there's a lot of these good projects out there in the Wales, and they're just not, it's like the politicians and the local authorities don't sort of decide, oh, that's fantastic, let's replicate that somewhere and help it happen. Because you're just waiting for the really motivated group of one or two people to get their act together, to find some money and do it. That's how it's run. You know, where the change that we need is to be more self-sufficient, locally more in control of loads of things. And it's not happening. We're waiting for the big companies all the time to do stuff, and they take over and they ride the
And all the profits will grow.
Well, you've heard my answer. I don't think perhaps we disagree on this.
3 points actually. Firstly, on fuel poverty, I sat on the Fuel Poverty Advisory Group for Wales representing older people for Age Cymru, and I can tell you that the ability is within the energy companies to make energy a lot cheaper for people, and that's where we would like our politicians to concentrate their efforts.
Yes, we like Ofgem too.
Because there is a huge discrepancy in the way that they do things. We are paying for electricity reduction in Scotland when we've got the worst example of economical depravity in Wales, but by virtue of the grid charges. There are a number of issues there that we can look at without looking at fracking. On the point of planning, and this is a really important point that we had to fight, when they go for a test site, and most of the sites that they're looking for now are test application sites, they do not require a full environmental study. And that would show up a load of issues why that should be turned down. The bad news is that once they've done the test site, and this is year 1 or year 2 down the line, that's no longer required because they have destroyed the local environmental habitat that would turn down the application. And point 3, on the point of wind farms being nicer, the infrastructure that goes into the wind farms, and if you want to go up above the Gilbert site at the moment, there's a huge infrastructure there at the moment for the wind farms. Centrica laughed at us because our application got turned down on the point of highways and the ability to take lorries through the middle of Morvale. But they won't need to do this in 2 years' time because they will use the infrastructure that's commonly used by the wind farms. So there's a new road ready for them to take it in, and we will not be able to turn it down again.
Can I just brief comment on that, or just observations? I'll go backwards. Yes, I agree with you what's happening with the Ring of Steel up on Gilbert, and I did get evidence to the planning inspector myself opposing that. On the planning guidelines, the kind of issues you're talking about is what they're looking at now in England to introduce in order to govern shale gas extraction. That's the sort of thing I would personally like the Welsh Government to be looking at as well. So I hope that comes up at the demonstration tomorrow.
Richard Cockle from Community Press Group. I know it's not an environmental issue, but I know in Balcombe and in Blackpool, the people's housing property has gone through the floor. Is the Welsh Government going to take on board anything like that?
Well, that's my point. They don't seem to be willing to tell us if they're going to be taking anything on board with this. Their default position is that the current guidance is fine, and that's it. Sorry, we don't all agree with that. I don't think I'm not in the government, I'm in the position.
Yeah.
It's a fair point to bring up.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Could I, gentlemen, just hear you?
Alex Marshall. On this business of planning, the one thing that concerns me is we have experience of that with mobile phone masts, where councils would be advising the councillors not to vote against the mobile phone mast because it would cost them money when they go to appeal. I would suggest that any company that applies for shale gas and fracking can afford to go to appeal, and the councils won't be able to afford to fight it. So they will be advising their councillors, you better vote for it or it'll cost us money.
Yeah, I always find that a very worrying, because I mean, you know, not the first person to pointed that out, I've seen it happen myself. It depends how an officer explains to a councillor what the position is, because, yeah, if you're going to appeal, of course it's going to cost you money. But the number of times I've heard it said almost with menaces is very worrying, and I've seen councillors vote in a particular way, not because they thought an appeal might have merit, and yes, they might win or lose, but because they're too scared to do it. And I think that's a very worrying trend.
Hi, my name's Andy Chival, Chairman of the Virginia Green Party, and it's music to my ears actually hearing a lot of what Susie had to say tonight about Conservatives taking the precautionary approach. I look forward to that being made public over the next few days. I do need to just take issue with a couple of points you said earlier, which a little bit of skin that slipped through. The whole issue about fuel poverty, I mean, it's been shown quite categorically that the impact of shale will have negligible effect on gas prices in this country. It's a completely different market to the United States.